They say every contract has fine print, but no one warned me that mine would cost my heart. If you've ever believed that love should never feel like a transaction, then make sure to like and subscribe, because this story will make you question what it really means to be chosen or owned. I never meant to fall in love with my boss. In fact, I spent months avoiding his eyes, pretending that Han Seo-jun, the youngest CEO in South Korea's tech history, was just another untouchable suit with a god complex. The first time I saw him, I was standing under the white fluorescent glare of Hanteca's 32nd floor lobby, my palms slick with nerves and the faint smell of disinfectant still clinging to my nurse's scrubs from my part-time job. I was a Nigerian intern with a temporary visa and too many dreams, and he was the kind of man who didn't look at people, he assessed them, like data points on a spreadsheet. When our eyes met, it wasn't romantic, it was cold calculation. "You're late," he'd said without glancing up from his phone, his voice smooth, clipped, deadly calm. In Korea, punctuality is respect. That was my first lesson in his world. Respect wasn't given, it was bought, earned, or signed into a contract. The internship was supposed to be my stepping stone, a way to pay for my brother's surgery back in Lagos and maybe, just maybe, find a future for myself. But destiny has a twisted sense of humor. One night, after an emergency company gala, I found myself locked in an elevator with Seo-jun. The city lights bled through the glass walls like liquid fire, and he stood there in his black suit, his reflection fractured by the glass. "Miss Okafor," he said suddenly, his tone clinical. "You're single, correct?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" He looked up for the first time, eyes sharp as ice. "I need a wife." The words hung there, absurd and impossible. He explained it with the precision of a business pitch. His mother had arranged a merger with a European investor who valued family-oriented leadership. The problem? His fiancée had run off with a rival CEO 2 days before the announcement. The solution? Me, a temporary wife. 1 year, a fixed contract, a monthly allowance, and a full visa sponsorship. In return, he said, you'll attend public events, maintain appearances, and follow confidentiality terms. You'll be compensated generously. His voice didn't waver once. I wanted to laugh, to ask if this was some reality show prank. But when he slid a folder across the glass floor with my brother's hospital estimate on top, I realized this wasn't a proposal, it was a transaction dressed as salvation. I told myself I was doing it for family. I told myself it was just business. But the day I walked down the marble steps of Seoul's City Hall in a white dress that wasn't mine, standing beside a man who wouldn't even touch my hand for the cameras, I felt something shift inside me. The tabloids called it the scandal of the year. The billionaire who married his intern. The African bride with the mysterious past. My inbox flooded with hate messages. My phone rang nonstop with unknown numbers asking how much I was paid. Madame Han, his mother, invited me to lunch the following week, where she didn't eat a single bite. "You will never be one of us," she said with the calm of someone who had practiced cruelty her whole life. "But if you behave, you might avoid humiliating my son." I smiled politely and replied, "Respectfully, madam, I married your son, not your approval." She never invited me again. At home, our marriage was a silent war. Seo-jun kept his distance, physically, emotionally, completely. We slept in separate rooms, spoke only when necessary, and dined across a table so long it could have been a conference board. Yet, there were moments, tiny cracks in his armor, that confused me. The night he found me crying in the laundry room after reading another racist headline, he didn't say a word. He just knelt, handed me a towel, and said quietly, "Never let them see you break." It wasn't comfort, it was strategy. But somehow it mattered. Over time, I began to see the man behind the CEO, the way he hesitated before speaking, the tremor in his hand when his phone rang with his mother's name flashing, the loneliness behind his control. I started to wonder if his coldness wasn't cruelty, but fear of losing control, of feeling something he couldn't manage in a spreadsheet. The turning point came during Hanteca's anniversary gala, a glittering circus of flashing cameras and whispered gossip. I was supposed to stand beside him like a prop, silent, elegant, invisible. But when one of the board members' wives sneered, I didn't know the company supported diversity projects loud enough for the entire table to hear, I froze. Before I could respond, Seo Jun stood. Mrs. Park, he said in that deadly calm tone that could slice glass, Hontech doesn't support diversity projects. It hires the best. And my wife is the best thing that's ever happened to me. The room went silent. For the first time, he reached for my hand, not as part of the contract, not as an act, but as something real. Cameras flashed, people whispered, and I realized the world had just witnessed the first genuine moment of our marriage. That night, he drove us home in silence. When we reached the penthouse, I turned to him and asked softly, "Why did you defend me?" He looked at me like he was searching for the right words, then simply said, "Because you didn't deserve that. None of this." Then he walked away. After that night, something between us changed. He started joining me for breakfast. He began asking about my brother. He even tried jollof rice, grimaced, but finished it. I started to forget that our marriage had an expiration date printed in ink. I started to feel safe. But peace never lasts long in the Han family. A week later, I found a letter slipped under my bedroom door, no sender, just a single line typed neatly on crisp paper. The contract ends soon. But if you don't leave quietly, you won't leave at all. My blood ran cold. I ran to Seojun's office, heart pounding, but his assistant stopped me. "The CEO is in a meeting with Madame Han," she said. Behind the frosted glass, I saw their silhouettes, his mother's sharp posture, his head bowed, her hand slamming a document onto his desk. My contract. My name. My fate. And that's when I realized the real deal wasn't between me and Seojun. It was between him and the woman who had built him. And I wasn't part of the business plan. I was collateral. The next morning, I woke to silence, the kind that hums with danger before the storm. The letter from under my door still lay on the dresser, its single line haunting me like a whisper I couldn't unhear. "If you don't leave quietly, you won't leave at all." I tried to convince myself it was a bluff, some cruel prank from the gossip blogs that fed off our scandal, but deep down I knew better. Madame Han didn't bluff. She orchestrated. When I stepped out of my room, Seojun was already dressed for work, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled to his elbows, his tie perfectly knotted, his face unreadable as he adjusted his cufflinks. "We need to talk," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. He didn't even look up. "About the contract?" The word contract hit like a slap. I took a deep breath. "About your mother. About this threat." He paused for a fraction of a second, then exhaled. "I'll handle it." Those 3 words, cold, controlled, final, were the very thing that terrified me. Because in his world, "I'll handle it" meant don't ask again. I wanted to scream that this wasn't business, that this was my life, but I knew better than to show weakness in the Han household. So I dressed, smiled for the cameras at breakfast, and pretended everything was fine, even as my hands trembled beneath the tablecloth. By noon, the news had broken. Hontech CEO's wife under investigation for immigration fraud. The headlines were merciless. Photos of my student visa, my work permit, and even my hospital bills for my brother were plastered across every digital outlet. My inbox flooded again, this time not with hate, but with mockery. "Gold digger exposed. Contract wife deported soon." I sat frozen in the penthouse living room as the television screamed my shame. Seojun stood by the window, his back to me, his jaw tight enough to crack. "Tell me this isn't your mother," I whispered. He didn't answer. "Seojun, look at me." He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "She's protecting the company. At my expense?" My voice broke. "At the expense of my dignity? My life?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration flashing for just a second before he caught himself. "I'm doing everything I can to fix this. But the board. I laughed bitterly. "You're worried about shareholders while my face is being dragged across the internet?" His eyes softened, but his tone didn't. "You knew what this was when you signed the contract." The words sliced deeper than any headline could. I stared at him, the man who once defended me in front of Seoul's elite, now hiding behind a clause. "You're right," I said quietly. "I signed a contract, not a marriage." That evening, government officials arrived at the penthouse. They claimed it was a routine verification, but I saw the way they looked at me, as if I was the fraud they'd been promised. I cooperated, handed over my documents, and watched them search through my drawers, my clothes, my phone. When they left, I turned to Seo Jun, who stood in the hallway like a ghost. "Say something," I whispered. "Anything." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "My lawyer will handle it." "Your lawyer?" My voice trembled with disbelief. "Not our lawyer. Yours." He didn't correct me. That's when I realized it. Whatever he was protecting, it wasn't me. The next week blurred into chaos. Hanteca's stock plummeted, and Seo Jun disappeared into endless meetings. I was summoned to immigration court with no legal counsel, facing accusations I couldn't disprove because the documents they'd shown, the bank transfers, the fake marriage reports, were forged with uncanny precision. Someone had spent months planning my downfall. And when I looked up at the press benches, I saw her, Madame Han, composed and radiant in white, her expression calm as marble. When the judge declared that my residency was being revoked pending investigation, I didn't cry. I stood tall, bowed slightly, and walked out of that courtroom with what little dignity I had left. The photographers swarmed like vultures, shouting questions about my fake marriage, about my price, about how it felt to trick a nation's most powerful man. I said nothing, but when one reporter shouted, "Did your husband know?" I stopped. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. He knew everything. The crowd erupted, flashes blinding me, but it was worth it to see the panic ripple through Seojin's perfect mask as he emerged behind me. That was the moment I understood he hadn't betrayed me for greed or pride. He'd betrayed me for control. Because control was all he knew. They gave me 72 hours to leave the country. Seo Jun came to my hotel room that night, his expression hollow, rain dripping from his coat. "I can fix this," he said quietly. "Just trust me." I laughed bitterly. "Trust? You mean the same trust you used to silence me in court? Or the trust you used to sell me to your mother's image of perfection?" He flinched, but didn't deny it. "You think I wanted this?" "I think you wanted to win," I said, my voice low. "And love doesn't exist in your vocabulary unless it's a power move." He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "Don't. You made your choice." I expected him to argue, to shout, to break the facade for once, but he just stood there, water dripping from his hair, his eyes glinting with something I didn't recognize. "If I told you I did this to protect you," he said softly, "would you believe me?" I stared at him for a long moment before answering no. "Because you don't protect people, Seo Jun. You own them." Then I closed the door. I left Seoul the next morning. The city's skyline blurred through my tears as the plane lifted off, carrying me away from the man who had turned my life into a press release. Back home in Lagos, the air felt heavier, the streets louder, but at least they were mine. I rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. I launched a startup using what I'd learned at Hantech, coding apps for small African businesses. I told myself I didn't miss him, that the ache in my chest was just habit, not heartbreak. But one night, months later, a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a thick envelope of documents, bank records, emails, court transcripts, all proving that Madame Han had orchestrated my deportation, forged my signatures, and bribed officials to ensure my silence. And beneath it all was a handwritten note in Korean. I turned her in. "I lost everything. But at least now you're free." My hands shook as I read it. The news broke the next day. Hanteca's CEO arrested for corporate fraud and obstruction of justice. The board forced his resignation. His mother vanished from public view. They said he'd confessed to everything, that he dismantled his empire to expose the woman who had destroyed mine. For the first time in months, I cried, not out of anger, not out of grief, but out of confusion. Because I had spent so long hating him for his silence, I hadn't realized that silence might have been the only weapon he had left. And somewhere between betrayal and redemption, I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he'd been telling the truth all along. I returned to Seoul 2 years later, not as a runaway wife or a disgraced name whispered in tabloid headlines, but as a witness, the woman whose testimony could either destroy Han Seo-jun completely or save what was left of his soul. The courtroom smelled like rain and disinfectant. the same sterile scent that had once filled the lobby where I first met him. But the man sitting across from me now wasn't the same immaculate CEO who'd once made me sign a contract to fake our love. His hair was longer, unstyled, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The world had stripped him of everything: his company, his power, even the arrogance that once made him untouchable. And yet, when our eyes met, something in his expression shifted. Not pride, not guilt, something softer. Relief. The judge asked if I was ready to speak, and I nodded. My voice didn't tremble as I told the truth, the full truth, about the woman behind the empire. How Madame Han had bribed officials to deport me, forged documents to protect her reputation, and silenced her son with blackmail that threatened his freedom. Every word felt like reopening an old wound, but this time, I didn't bleed for him. I bled for myself. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't here to save him. I was here to save my story from being rewritten. The trial lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of watching Seojun's life laid bare. His mother's corruption exposed. Her voice played aloud in secret recordings where she ordered investigators to erase the African woman and her stain on our name. The courtroom gasped, reporters scribbled furiously, and I watched the empire that once crushed me collapse beneath the weight of its own lies. When the judge asked Seojun why he'd turned his mother in, his answer silenced the room. Because she taught me to build walls, and she never realized love doesn't live behind walls. Nia taught me that. He turned toward me then, his eyes shining, not with pity, but with something I hadn't seen since the night he first defended me. I thought power was everything. Until the day I watched the woman I loved lose everything because of my silence. The judge ruled in my favor, clearing my name of all charges, but that victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like peace, the kind that only comes when you finally stop fighting ghosts. Madame Han was sentenced to prison for conspiracy and fraud, her empire dismantled, her name erased from the boards she once rolled. Seojun walked out of that courthouse a free man, but not a powerful one. He disappeared from the headlines, from the city, from everything. And for a long time, I thought that was the end of our story. But love, real love, doesn't end where contracts do. Months later, I found myself standing on a quiet pier in Busan, the wind tangling my braids as I stared out at the sea. That's when I heard his voice, low, unsure, familiar. "You came." I turned, and there he was. No suit, no title, just a man holding a basket of tools and a nervous half-smile. He'd opened a small tech academy for underprivileged kids, teaching them coding and design. His eyes held none of the sharpness I remembered, only sincerity. "I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me," he said quietly. "I didn't come for forgiveness," I replied. "I came to see who you became." He looked down, a soft laugh escaping him. "Still a man trying to be worthy of you." I wanted to be angry, to remind him of every tear, every humiliation. Every night, I lay awake wishing I'd never met him, but all I could see was the boy beneath the armor, the one who had finally learned what love costs when it's not written in ink. We walked along the pier, saying little, the silence between us no longer heavy but human. When we reached the edge, he stopped and took something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. "This was supposed to be the final page of our contract," he said. "I never signed it." I unfolded it, and inside, in his handwriting, were just 3 words: no expiration date. Years passed like a gentle tide. I opened a small foundation that partnered with his academy, teaching young African immigrants in Korea how to code, how to build, how to dream without borders. Seoul had stopped whispering my name. Now they printed it on invitations, on panels, on awards. Sometimes, the world forgets, but it also learns to heal. And Seojun? He never left my life again, not as a CEO, not as a husband bound by paper, but as a man who learned that love isn't control, it's surrender. On our wedding day, there were no cameras, no diamonds, no board members, just a quiet garden filled with laughter and the smell of jollof rice and bulgogi mingling in the air. When he placed the ring on my finger, he whispered, "This time, no contracts." I smiled. This time, no escape. Now, years later, I sit by our window overlooking the Han River, our son asleep in my arms. He has his father's eyes, my skin, and the fearless heart of someone born from two worlds that tried to reject each other and failed. Sometimes, when I catch Seojun watching us, I see a piece in him that I once thought impossible. The man who built walls now builds homes for children who have none. The woman who was once his contract now holds his forever. And when he leans over to kiss my forehead and whispers, "You once signed a contract with a stranger," I laugh softly and answer, "And now that stranger can't escape my love." Because in the end, the truth is simple. We were never bound by ink. We were bound by the lessons we learned through pain, forgiveness, and faith that the most powerful contracts aren't signed on paper. They're written quietly between two hearts that refuse to give up. And that's how the girl who was once bought to play a part became the woman who rewrote the ending.